welcome to the Viva Bastardo show, part of the Hagerty podcast network. We are in a new location with 82% more New York, so you will hear muggings, riots, police sirens, people having sex, all sorts of things in the background. Today we have my very good friend Yale Evelev, who is a co-founder with David Byrne of a record label called Luaka Bop. He's a massive car fiend. He's got a whole host of apocalyptic stories about all sorts of cars he's driven. He's owned Ferraris, BMWs, Abarth, Simcas, and other obscure stuff. So let's get into it. This podcast is brought to you by Economy Signs, the specialty company. It's a father and son joint. They've been in business since 1973, and they work on everything from spec Miatas to cars formerly driven by Paul Newman. They have an incredibly deep archive of brand decals from old races like the Daytona in the 70s, and they specialize in vintage motorsport liveries. Is it liveries or livery? Anyway, they've done a ton of vintage Ferraris and priceless cars with history. If you've been to any vintage race in the USA, I'm sure you've seen their work. They do paint and vinyl, which is handy if you don't want to ruin your car. And they do any kind of thing, dragsters, motorcycles, stock cars, scooters. Well, maybe not. But anyway, check them out. They're fantastically talented. This podcast is also brought to you by Inbound Motorsports. Rami, the main geezer who runs it, says a lot of you have been reaching out. Please continue to do so. He can bring in cars from anywhere, Japan, Europe, Asia, which is also Japan. He's bringing a ton of stuff. I think there's been a strange peak of interest in Mitsubishi Pajero Evolutions. I don't know why. But anyway, give Rami a call. He's the most delightful guy, and he will be able to find you the bizarre car of your dreams. This podcast is also brought to you by Vital Oxide. I am now gesturing to the bottle gloriously and seductively if you're watching on YouTube. It's a very powerful, heavy-duty odor eliminator. It doesn't just eliminate the odors, it destroys them entirely. It's a surface disinfectant. It kills viruses like COVID-19. It eliminates mold and mildew for up to 4 weeks. And there's no fragrance added, which is always fantastic because I don't like that fake piney smell. So Vital Oxide. Check it out, listeners. This podcast brought to you by Stray Dog Classics, a Brooklyn-based company that brings in Range Rovers, rust-free classic Range Rovers from Spain. They do all new paint, suspension, wheels, carpets. They go through it mechanically. These trucks are beautiful. I know Darren, the geezer who runs it. All the trucks are irritatingly beautiful and often in really interesting colors. They typically do client-ordered vehicles, but if you're super impatient, he's got a rare 91 two-door white car with a perfect untouched interior that's coming in. So if that floats your boat, slide into Darren's emails or messages on Instagram at Stray Dog Classics and let him know you're hungry for a nice, tasty Range Rover. Tell him I sent you. Tell him Phil sent you. So, hello everyone, and welcome to the Viva.
This is the third time Phil's done this, by the way. Today. Yes, today. I'm talking about today.
Within the last 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Welcome to the Viva Bastardo show. I am delighted to have my friend, Yale. I don't think I'm Evelev. Is that? I don't know.
That's it. That's correct. Very good.
My very good friend. If you've ever watched The Muppets, and you know who Statler and Waldorf are, the two old geezers who are in the balcony seat who are always bickering, that is basically Yale and I's relationship. We've known each other for 10
years.
10 years or so?
Yeah.
10 years of pure joy.
Yes.
So Yale, I'll give you the executive summary, but
Do you really know? I mean, you don't even know my last name. You've known me for 10 years. You don't know my last name. Do you have an executive summary?
I was going to say, that's very surprising. You've been friends for 10 years.
Well,
do you know his last name?
Of course. But the difference is, you see, here's the thing. we are doing this podcast, right? And Phil is supposed to ask me questions or something like that. I said, Phil doesn't know anything about me.
I do.
He doesn't know my last name. You know what I mean?
All right.
He's got you on that.
No, I just wasn't sure how to if I was pronouncing it correctly because it could, Anyway, so Yale, you have a record album with David Byrne.
Record label.
Record label. Sorry, shit. Record label with David Byrne called Luaka Bop. right? And how long's that? See, I've done research.
Yeah.
How long's that been going on for?
32 years.
32 years.
Wait, can we get some context on who David is? Because I feel like
little known artist David Byrne.
I mean, I do like talking to people who don't know who he is, but I mean, he was the singer in the Talking Heads, so that's most people seem to know who the Talking Heads are.
And so, and you mostly focus on like brass construction.
This is our in joke because I mean, Phil doesn't know anything about music. He probably knew stuff about music in high school or something like that. So he says, of course I know stuff about music. I know brass construction. So brass construction, which was a kind of a band from New York that
they were an amazing funk band from New York in the 70s
that made pre-disco music that is fairly obscure now, and that's
because
this is Phil's bona fides.
The joke,
bona fides.
The joke is because Yale. Is it safe to say that Luaka Bop makes you kind of specialize in kind of obscure music and obscure musicians, but in a kind of fascinating way?
That's not our goal. I mean,
no, but it's sort of safe to say that's where you ended up.
I mean, that's kind of, basically it's a record label. It's a project for me to learn about stuff. And as a record label, I go, okay, I don't know anything about this. Let's start doing records of this material because
I thought that was my function.
Because I want to learn. I want to learn about that's kind of, so that stuff tends to be obscure because I know a lot about different kinds of music. So, that pushes me to.
Do you want to give a couple of examples of some of the most glorious?
We the latest record we did was and this is fair. These are people who are pretty well known to some. We did a record with Pharoah Sanders and Floating Points. And Pharoah Sanders is a jazz sax player who played with Coltrane, the last kind of living giant from that era, and who's very grumpy, lives in California. And we basically spent literally 5 years having chicken and waffles and Langer's deli lunches with him to try to get him to do the record. And eventually he said yes. And then during COVID, we put this record out, and it was a big, it was a 146-minute piece, which seemed highly uncommercial to me, but it really kind of captured people's imagination.
So wait, the one track was 46 minutes?
Yes.
And I remember the success of that record made you disgruntled.
Well, no. Actually, I really like things to succeed when they're not expected to succeed.
Right.
It's only when things are obviously going to succeed that it gets, like, I get annoyed if something's doing really well and that's all anybody wants to talk to me about. Do you know what I mean? It's like, well, of course that's going to do well, So, but I like things that are a challenge. I mean, the record business is a real challenge. It keeps changing every time you put out a record. There's kind of the scenario of how you're putting the record out or what you're putting it out in is different. So that's pretty interesting. And I've been doing it for a long time, and I've seen a lot of different evolutions of the record industry.
I mean, didn't you do a record with some sort of cult from Brazil? What was
well, yeah. We are doing one coming up, but we did one with a singer who's kind of the Elvis Presley of Brazil named Tim Maia.
Okay.
Jim Maia. And he at 17, he got annoyed he was in a band in Brazil. He got annoyed at the bandmates who had left him and moved to New York. But he didn't end up in New York. He ended up in Nyack. And yeah,
was there a mistake? Like he misread the ticket?
I don't really know how that happened, but that's where he ended up.
Because Nyack in New York, you could almost see how you might get confused if you're not from.
He was there for 5 years, living on people's couches, doing kind of odd jobs, and he had a band called the Ideals. And some friends of his were going to Florida, so he went to Florida with them, and he got arrested in a stolen car smoking a joint and deported back to Brazil. And the friends in Nyack never knew what happened to him, but he became one of the biggest stars in Brazil. It didn't happen right away, but he came here and got really into soul music, and he was the first person in Brazil to do that sort of music in Brazil. So he became a huge star.
Wow.
But then we should also talk about how we met, because you are a massive car fiend, and I'm also a massive car fiend. I'm not sure if you know that, but and a huge foodie.
But you're not a big record label fiend?
No, yeah. Matt's looking at this. Wait a second, this is Hagerty. What are we talking about records for?
No, I'm actually looking, because it's super interesting, because I think for a lot of people that are listening, they like to drive their car. You can listen to the engine for so much time, but it's also nice to have like a good soundtrack when you drive.
Yeah.
So music, I think, and cars go hand in hand.
Yeah.
I mean, does anyone have an old car that has a good? I mean,
I used to I had a Ferrari for a while, 1964. 330 4-seat Ferrari, and And a friend of mine worked for the Letterman show, and they had a DC ability to listen to DC stuff. So I would bring car radios by.
Wait, what's DC stuff?
That's, direct current, and so opposed to plugging it into the wall, batteries.
Yeah.
So I would bring car radios by and speakers, and I kept trying to figure out what 60s car radio with what speaker would sound kind of halfway decent. Because I like the idea of, listening to a car radio that sounds like the era the car is from. But I wanted it to sound good, still within that context.
That's a really interesting concept, though. Like building the stereo so it's like period correct.
But sounds okay.
Right.
Did you ever have an in-car gramophone?
No. But I did spend like $2,000 once on a car stereo and then sold the car. And that was like the last time I ever did that kind of thing.
So you're unusual as a vintage car owner, because not dissimilar to me. This is an in-joke between me and Yael. Yael is he will go. There's a couple of things about Yael that everyone should know. Is that one is you drive your cars massive distance. You're a foodie, and two is you drive your cars massive distances. So you will drive. And this is always our in-joke that you will drive, 600 miles to get a gourmet pretzel. But the other thing,
I like to have a goal in mind. So I like that goal. That goal is really nice. So, and I like to drive for long distances. I do. I like to go on a whole day drive. And
but you use your cars in a way that most people. I mean, didn't you take the Ferrari? What is it? 65?
64.
Didn't you take that cross country?
No.
Or semi-cross country?
I would plan to go to cross country with the car, but I don't think it ever would have made it. I mean, I spent $3 a mile on maintenance on that car. literally $3 a mile on maintenance. But I did.
When did you work that out? How did you work that out? I guess you just look at the mileage and look at how much you spent.
I kept a tabulation because I was on these boards and we would talk about how hard is it to own a vintage Ferrari. And I remember before I bought that car, I called up a dealer in California and I said, "Hey, you're selling a 330 GT, just like I'm looking for. Have you ever driven that any distance?" "Oh yeah." And he's in LA. He's going, "We've driven to Santa Barbara in that, And it's like, well, that's not really that far. What I mean? So, and with my car, the Ferrari would break down pretty much every third time. And the interesting thing is,
it broke down with you and I. It broke down with me.
Yeah,
we went to see a Lancia Zagato. I can't remember what it was, and it was so cool, but drove miserably. And you had just had the engine rebuilt.
Yeah,
and then so we're leaving.
That was the last time. That was it. That was the last.
We were leaving, and Yael goes around a corner, and then I'm behind him, and I come around the corner. I just see this massive nimbus cloud of smoke, and Yael's in that cloud somewhere, and I realize, oh, okay, something's happened to his newly rebuilt Ferrari.
Yeah, that was a bad story.
But the joke about you is that you there's always like.
Well, I always leave magazines. I would always leave magazines in the car. So when I broke down, I would wait for the tow truck.
You have something to read.
And have something to read. Now,
right.
I literally knew when I had the Ferrari, every flatbed tow truck driver in New York City who would work for AAA. I literally knew everyone because I would see them multiple times. I remember once
you get Christmas cards
driving up the West Side Highway, and the car won't start. And I know I just need a jump, and there's two policewomen there, and I said, "Do you think you could give me a push?" And they're like, "That's such a nice car." I go, "Yeah."
You know what?
Could you give me a push? What are you doing in this car? Where are you going? I'm going, "Well, I'm just driving." "Well, you're just driving around. This is a parade car. You shouldn't be just driving around in this car. You should be taking this on parades." And I'm going like, "Well, okay, but can you give me a push?" No, they're like, "No."
They didn't give you a push?
No, they didn't give me
I've always found that, like, I remember when I had the 246 Dino, I was on 2nd Avenue, like 50th, and it died at the lights. And immediately there were like 7 people who wanted to help me push it off to the side. Because people in New York are so delighted
off to the side. That's different. See, but when I first got the car, I had a vapor lock problem, and it has electric fuel pump. I didn't realize, just leave the electric fuel pump on, So it had electric fuel pump. I'm getting into the Holland Tunnel, boom, the car stops.
Oh, that's the ultimate nightmare.
That's the fear.
People pulled out, jumped out of, like you said, they jumped right off the sidewalks. "Hey, you want to push?" Aluminum deck, trunk, push.
Delicate.
Dense, like, oh God.
So you like to drive these massive distances, and why don't you tell everyone what your nickname is for me?
The silver manatee.
The silver manatee.
Yael calls me the silver manatee because he thinks, I think.
No, this is the story. The thing is that
okay, hang on.
when I first met Phil, I thought, wow, a vintage car owner in New York City. Do you know how rare that is? There aren't that many of them. My whole life is going to open up and have someone to go driving around with. This is going to be amazing. The first time I took Phil on any kind of drive, which was an afternoon drive, he goes, "Oh, I'm feeling sick. I got to go home."
Oh, I was queasy. I was queasy.
But you've never gone on another drive.
Queasy from what though?
From Yale. Yale made me queasy. Well, okay, but I would say this. When we met 10 years ago, I had a 2-year-old. So it was much harder for me to sort of go off on these like long, day.
And it's easy
18
now, so you're willing to do that
I'm
now?
ready to go.
I was going to say, wouldn't it be nicer to do it then?
Yeah, but the 2-year-old.
No, because then I get my nuts minced by the missus.
That's the price you pay.
Yeah.
Minced nuts. So.
But wait, do you have a nickname for Yale?
Yeah.
Do we?
Well, you have a nickname for everybody, so
No,
I don't really want to hear Phil's.
I was going to say,
nickname from me.
how do you have him in your phone?
It just says Yale.
No last name, obviously.
There you go.
Yeah.
Right, yes.
I don't think I have. That's weird, actually, because you should have a nickname.
No.
I mean, there is this sense, like when everyone goes for a drive occasionally, I'll always say, "Oh, so what happened to Yale's car?" Or someone will call me and go, "Oh yeah, Yale's car blew a gasket, or he had a flat tire." Or
I mean, that's happened less when I've gotten rid of since I've gotten rid of the Ferrari. I mean,
why don't we just discuss the? Why don't we discuss? See,
Right,
I'm going to pull out the trump card here. Yale has a 1972 BMW.
Oh yeah,
What year is that?
1974 BMW 2002 Turbo.
So that has been at the mechanics for 7 years.
Well, I mean more than that, but
How long? How long? Let's have
Well, I mean, it's not all at once. Okay, I bought the car.
the longest period.
I bought the car from a guy in Massachusetts, and I drove it for a couple of years. And they're legendary for the turbos themselves.
The Kugel.
No, that's the fuel injection.
Okay.
pump. They're legendary for the turbos themselves wearing out. In fact, when the cars were new, you could return the turbo to BMW for a core charge and get a rebuilt one.
Mm-hmm.
This was like they expected you to do this every 10,000 miles.
It's a consumable at that point.
It was a consumable. That's right. So I took it to a mechanic that had done some work on it, and I said, "Can you check the turbo?" And they go, "Oh my God! But don't worry, we know someone who can rebuild the turbo." And I said, "Okay, great." So pull the turbo out. That was 11 years without it because BMW made no rebuild kits.
Wait, it was an 11-year gap.
An 11-year gap. There was no parts available for it, and BMW about 5 of those years.
Okay, but can I just
had told me they were making new turbos to sell to the turbo owners. And so every year I would call them up a few times a year and they go, in 4 months, we will have the turbos. I'm sorry it's taken a long time. We fired the guy who ran the program before. He totally screwed everything up. They still are not selling those turbos.
But hang on, there's got to be other people who own that car. So
course,
surely other people have a workaround.
But I mean, here's the other thing. It gets.
The story gets larger and larger.
One is I like to drive the cars.
Yeah.
As you've said.
Like me.
I have a 1970 911S. I've put 75,000, maybe close to
By the
100,000
way,
miles on it.
that is the ultimate record label executive car. I just want to point that out.
I must be the ultimate record.
You must
label.
be.
Well, also, we should also throw in that you are a member of Grupa.
Yeah.
Do you
can throw that
do
in.
you have to say that? Grupa? Is it Grup?
It's
Grupa?
It's Grupp.
Is it Grup? Grappa? Grappa? Like it's
Grappa.
just
That's like it's like an Italian aperitif.
Greek.
Yeah.
So you're
Grappa is Greek.
Wait, okay, so you've got...
Oh, no, wait.
I totally derailed us. I apologize. So you've got the 2002 Turbo still sitting.
Well, okay.
Well,
Okay, so I bought a new old stock. I gave up waiting for BMW. I bought a new old stock turbo in eBay in Germany. The guy would not ship it to America, so I had a friend in Germany pick it up, and when he came to the States, went through customs with it, and they go, "What is this, sir?"
it's a turbo for a 76 BMW.
Yes, and put that in, and that was great. But there was a lot of white smoke still, and I talked to one of the two turbo guys one of the two guys in America who works on these, and he goes, "Oh, that's the rings on those cars are pretty weak, and really we replaced the rings, and that they're just blowing oil past the rings." So okay, and I sent the car out to him, and then COVID happened, so that car's been there for 2.5 years.
Wow. Wow.
So hang on, let me just wait a minute. Hold on.
I don't know how much of my Phil goes, "Can we talk about anything?"
No. I just want to know, man. So, what's the total period, do you think, amount of driving you've done in, say, the last 14 years for the BMW? Like 2 weeks?
Yeah, I mean, well, a couple of years. I've driven a. It's a wonderful car, and what's really cool about it. So you asked about what you can do to. I mean, the other turbo owners. There is Oldenzaal in Germany, which is a BMW restoration specialist, now is making turbos, but their turbos are better than the original turbos. And the beauty of the car was that the turbo lag was so great that you could like go get coffee, in between turbo lag, and you could watch the turbo gauge, and turbo gauge just goes yellow, 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 and then it's a very tiny little bit of green, and then it's in the red. So you had to feather the car the whole time, and so it's this beautiful balance that you had to figure out how to drive this car. When do you hit the turbo, so the turbo lag is ending when you're coming out of the curve.
When
you're coming out of the curve, you can't push it too hard, because then you're going to go into the red. So
it's funny. I used to not like turbo cars, and then over the last 5 or 6 years, I found that I own almost exclusively turbocharged cars from the 80s or early 90s. Mm-hmm. And like you say, there's this beautiful kind of algebraic equation when you drive it's very intellectually engaging, as stupid as that sounds.
Yeah.
Because you're right. You're sort of feathering. You're keeping it on boost. You're watching when the boost comes on. You don't want to come on in the corners, and there's something really rewarding about that. Plus, for instance, in the 220, there's something that people always people always talked about old turbo like it was this unpredictable thing, which just suddenly come on. You'd be driving around and suddenly there'd be turbo, which is not at all. It's very predictable. I found.
I always assumed, like with the Porsche 911 turbo, that I've never driven one, so I have no idea why that was such a handful for people. I don't really get it, unless the whole concept of a turbo was so foreign that people would just constantly put their foot in it all the time and end up in turbo boost.
I feel like
and off the road.
I feel like it's kind of like sex. Like the orgasm is coming and you're aware of at what point it's arriving, and then you get sleepy right after the turbo kicks in.
But it's just a permanent sleep in a 911 turbo back then.
So let's continue. Wait, I want to continue the Yale Hall of Automotive Nightmares. So then
you have to understand, owning a vintage car, to me, the troubles with the vintage car are not daunting. They're just part of the package. And because I like to go long distances, I drive the cars a lot. I am in situations.
That's the thing about owning a vintage car. It's part of owning an old car is that it's going to screw you at some point. Whenever I drive something old, it's just going to break. There's things that
break down, and it's going to be fine.
What about you also had that Abarth that you couldn't fit in. Which is
and I'm
really,
not that big.
Which is shocking because you're like an Italian-sized gentleman.
Yeah, I am. Yeah. Well, I bought so we have a friend named Eric who works for Bonhams, and I had seen a picture of this Abarth that Bonhams was selling at the Padua auction. And
so wait, just give everyone a little explanation about what this car is for people.
Okay, it looks like a Simca Abarth, which was. I don't know if that helps at all.
That's going to make it more obscure.
Okay. But it's based on a Fiat 600, and it was a body that Abarth built themselves because they got in an argument.
And this is a 1960s.
63.
Okay.
So I said to Eric, our friend, Eric, what's the story with that, that Abarth Mano Mille, which is what it was, that you guys are selling in Padua? Oh, you should bet on that. I said, well, I don't really want a car. Just was wondering. I mean, I always liked...
Which is bullshit, because you always want a car.
I always wanted a Simca Abarth, and it looked just like a Simca Abarth, and I thought it was a Simca Abarth without the same engine, It looked exactly the same in the pictures. So he goes, well, just bid on it. Just bid the minimum. What kind of... Just bid the,
you fell for Minos.
I was going to say,
He did the same to me when I was buying the Peugeot T16. I was on the phone. He was like, just another $5,000, just a round of drinks. Go on. Sorry, I interrupted.
And anyway, so I won the car. And it ended up here, and I went down to the pier to pick it up. I'd never picked up a car at the pier in my dreams.
Hang on, we should explain what the picking up at the pier. It just sounds like it's just like so. When you buy a car, often if it's overseas, it's shipped to you, right? And then you have to go to the docks, which is Newark or Port Elizabeth.
There's no dock.
Well, yeah, but it's but it's called it. But you go to Port Elizabeth, and you have to walk through this parking lot of all these imported cars, and then and it's kind of a magical experience. And then when you're walking around, you see your car like parked next to whatever, like a Daihatsu from Japan, and there it is, and you kind of see it. And it's really, I loved. It's so much fun to do that. So you have to wear a high.
It's kind of scary at first because you hear a lot of stories about the docks, and I don't know if you've ever gone to we used to ship records through JFK, and it was always hell to try to get them out of the customs, because the customs guys would always make sure to go to lunch whenever you got there, and there would always be a 2-hour wait, and then you didn't have the forms corrected, all this stuff, but.
You have to wear the high-vis vest, which they charge you $10 to buy one.
Unless you
bring your own.
I've brought my own.
I was going to say, if you've been a few times.
Yeah.
Bring
your own high-vis vest.
So anyway, the car wouldn't start. I thought, okay, I won't start. Got the tow truck, towed it up to the mechanic. The mechanic says, someone put a head gasket in that actually doesn't fit this head. The pistons were touching the head gasket. So we have to kind of go in there, and then we change the pistons, and then because the rings aren't right, and one of those things. So after months and months and months, I take the car out for a drive, and I said to the mechanic, "You've driven the car?" "Oh yeah, I've driven the car." Well, the mechanic has never driven the car on a highway because he doesn't believe in driving, small Abarth-like cars on a highway. But I'm on a highway
because they go like 75.
Well, I'm going 80, and it's pushing. It's a 5,000 RPM at 80, and all of a sudden the cabin fills up with black smoke. Black smoke to the extent I cannot see anything, and I'm on a highway with trucks, so I have to open the door to look down at the ground to see where the dotted lines are, so I can get off the road. And
this is a typical Yale story. This is not an unusual Yale story.
It's kind of like I felt the Monomille was a kind of car that wanted to kill me. Other cars just break down. This one really wanted to do it.
Other cars just want to annoy you, but this one wanted to do you in.
way,
Right, this one wanted to go back to Europe.
So you got rid of that.
I sold that on.
And then you got...
Because I bought a long-nosed Bialbero. Abarth also same car in a way, but different body and a more highly tuned engine.
So do you want to... That's an amazing story. Do you want to talk about that?
Well,
hang on. You bought it in Japan, but the Japanese, was it a dealer?
Well,
okay.
You want me to tell a story? You want to tell?
No, I want to tell the story.
I want Phil to tell your story with not as much detail.
It's going to be so much more entertaining if I tell it. There's be better words, English accent. Come on, people will love it. Okay. Well, okay. So, can I just? Because I love this little nugget. It was a Japanese dealer, right? Mm-hmm. And he wouldn't sell to a non-Japanese buyer. Right. So you had to find a Japanese guy in Japan who would pretend to be buying it, but he would be buying it for you.
Straw purchase?
Yeah, is that correct?
That's correct.
That was the okay.
Do we want to do that on publicly?
Okay. I was going to say, what's the statute of limitations on that?
Yeah. Well, okay. So I had been in Japan maybe 5 years ago with my wife, and the last day we were there, it was a Sunday in Tokyo, and there were a lot of vintage cars driving around, and I saw this Honda S800 convertible, and the guy pulled over. This girl gets out. She goes into a building. I come running down the street. And I go, hey, what's it like to own it? Do you speak English? What's it like to own a vintage car?
I just interrupt for a minute? Yale, this is not an unusual occurrence. When I used to go to Cars and Coffee with Yale, and he'd see an interesting car pull up, he would run up to the car as the guy was still driving and pepper the guy with questions. As the guy,
this is the told me about this guy.
Yeah. Okay. Like they're trying to park and everyone's watching them trying to park. And he's like, hey, what do you choose that color for? Way, is that a 5-speed or a 6-speed? Hey. And then they hit another car, then they're mad at you. Anyway, sorry.
I had a really nice conversation with him, and it turned out we knew people in common, and it was kind of cool. So then the next day we leave. So a friend of ours bought a Simca Abarth, and I think it was about to buy a Simca Abarth, I should say. And I thought, if you don't buy it, then that's the car I've always wanted. Let me buy it. And he said, I'm going to think about that. And then he bought it. So I was kind of feeling really down, and I started really applying myself to find a Simca Abarth. Abarth made about 30 cars, maybe 50 cars, Simca Abarths. And then Chrysler bought Simca, and the Abarth Simca program ended. But Abarth was left with 30 bodies and chassis. And they sold them to their dealer in England called Radbourne. And Radbourne decided to make a Radbourne, which was a Simca Abarth with a Fiat 124 souped-up engine, and they would sell it as a sports car in England. It didn't do very well, but there are these 30 Radbournes, still around. And I found one in Japan. I thought, okay, I'll get a Radbourne, which is a Simca Abarth, except that it's not a Simca Abarth, but it could be a Simca Abarth.
Right, it is, but it isn't.
Yeah. But I'm trying to figure out, how do I get this Radbourne out of Japan? And I remember the guy who I had met on the street in Tokyo, who a friend of mine, a mutual friend of ours, had said, he brings in Japanese small trucks for another guy, a friend of his. So he's sent a lot of cars back to the States. And I called him up, or I wrote him, and I said, hey, do you think you could help me get a car out of Japan. He goes, yeah, I think I could. I think I can do that. I know how to do that. I've done that before. And by the way, there's this long nose Abarth for sale at this dealer that you love in the north of Japan. And I saw a picture of it, and the dealer had this car in his living room, this long nose Abarth in his living room. And it had been in his living, when you look on his Instagram, it would be there, always in the background.
I've got to say that that is always a dream for me.
Oh my God.
Like indoor parking with the sofa?
Yeah.
No, I mean, come on, how great would it be to have like an incredible car in your living room? Is
And
that
you know-
not?
yeah,
The Silver Manatee would really love that.
Yeah. Corbusier, had a ramp in his house in Paris, outside of Paris, that the car was supposed to drive up and be in your living room.
Did he have like a goggle mobile or something?
I have no idea what he had. I don't think he ever did that, but he could have.
Right.
So you found the not Simca, northern Japan.
No. I found the Simca part that was a Radborn,
Right.
but he found for me a different car that wasn't a Simca Abarth, that was like the Monomile I had, but a prettier body and a more souped up engine. And I thought, okay, instead of having to go through the whole story of what a Radborn is each time, maybe I should just get this, this Abarth long nose Bialboro. And so I said, okay, let's get that. Which meant he said the dealer won't sell it to me unless I visit it. He won't just sell it to me. You have to go see it, and it's an hour and a half flight from me. So eventually he flew up there and saw the car and sent me pictures.
I love that that's a condition of the sale.
Yeah.
Because I guess, was it that the dealer was very attached, or was a sign of, like it was like...
I thought everything the dealer had to say was so soulful and, deep.
Right.
His Instagram is like water dripping, cats moving around slowly.
And in the Abarth in the corner.
And Abarth in the corner, or like some
Right.
Alpine Renault backing up into a snowy
Right.
parking
The
lot.
car's going to come with profound knowledge.
Yeah. So at any rate, I eventually, we get the car, and then we can't figure out, because of COVID and all the shipping issues, how to get it out of the country. None of the ways that my friend in Japan had used before worked. And it just sat there for, months and months and months. And we kept trying to figure out different ways to get it. And then a friend of mine was talking to a friend of mine who has an Abarth, had Abarth his whole life. And he said, what happened to that Monomile? Did you ever sell it? I go, yeah, I did sell it. He says, yeah, you know what? I thought, but I had a long nose Bialboro. He goes, oh, you got a Bialboro. Does it have a, oil temperature gauge in the middle of the dash? I go, no, it doesn't. He goes, it doesn't? Well, all Bialboros have oil
And
temperature.
that's always the worst thing. Your heart just drops, because especially if we should give people a bit of context, when you're buying very obscure low production cars from the 60s, often there are competing canons of knowledge. Like some group of people say this is correct, another group of people say this is correct. This guy has written a book about it. This guy, this other guy, his grandfather worked at the factory. He says that's correct. So there's always competing bits of knowledge, but also because of those are all race cars. So a lot of them have been messed around with, had the engines replaced, and that was never a big deal in period. But then when they became valuable, people get all kind of obsessive about, like, it has to be numbers matching and all that stuff, when it probably never was numbers matching. So he says that, does it have the center oil gauge, whatever, and you say no.
So I asked the one guy who deals in Abarth parts, who's an English guy who lives in Italy, married an Italian woman.
So he's one of the authorities on Abarth.
He's one of the authorities.
Right.
Says,
He's one of the popes.
That car in 65 or 64 did not have the water temperature gauge in the middle of the dash. Could you send me a picture of your dash? And because I have a picture because I gave him the number of the car, because I have a picture of that dash of that car from 30 years ago.
Right.
I sent him a picture of the dash, and it does not match the picture that he has. And I'm like, oh God.
Because when he said that was correct initially, you must have been like, oh, fantastic news, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I figure, okay, I better get an Abarth expert in Japan to take a look at it. So I asked him, I said, do you know anybody in Japan? And he goes, oh, yes, this guy. So he sends me a contact for somebody, and he talks to the guy, and the guy, he says, hey, he knows you. I go, an Abarth expert in Japan knows me? How can that be? This was the same guy who was selling me the Radborn.
So
since I didn't buy the Radborn, he wouldn't have anything to do with me, because I didn't buy the Radborn. Yeah.
So, but the car is now here.
It is here. I still have no idea what it is. I was sold under the auspice and the understanding that the engine leaks oil, and I sent it to an expert.
I feel like that's just a factory option when it's a 60s Italian car,
Yeah.
isn't it? Do you want a lot of oil leaking or a small or a shitload of oil leaking?
I mean, they're a Fiat-based engine, and I sent it to a guy who specializes in Fiats and bought up all the Fiat dealers in the East Coast and has a ton of parts. And he goes, he goes, oh, I'm sure we can, this is going to be no problem. Usually this is what happens when it leaks oil. People don't work on this part, and they don't really. And he got to say, I've never seen this in 40 years.
Wow.
So this was what, 7 years ago now?
No. It was about 4 months.
Okay.
So I feel you have a lot of challenging classic car stories. Do you have just a regular, dependable, everyday get around?
Well,
we have the same car.
My wife won't ride in any of the old cars.
I understand that.
Yeah, so I have a Audi station wagon.
Okay.
Which doesn't have but I bought the same car that you have, but yours doesn't have any of the problems I have. I feel like you gave me the Yale Lurgy.
Yeah. This is the problem with my friends think that anything's wrong with their cars is my fault.
Right, like you
Because
saw
if you-
the car once or touched
Yeah,
it. It's like,
yeah,
oh,
exactly.
Like
right,
if you go
exactly
for a
right.
drive with Yale, chances are you will have an unexpected mechanical problem, and it's Yale's fault.
Not necessarily. I don't.
But highly, I'd say like a 70% chance.
Luckily, that's why you never go to drive with me. So
That's why, man. I'm just trying to save money on repairs.
Wait, so where did we actually get your guys' origin story?
We met at a Cars and Coffee.
I had a.
Yale came running up to me when I was trying to park.
I
said,
had this 1970 911S, and I was parking it in. Two laughing English guys came over to me, and were sort of laughing, making jokes like nonstop.
At you?
No, just about anything.
Oh,
it was
yeah.
you and Nut King.
Yeah, that's right. The Nut King.
Yeah. I think that's how we met.
Yeah. Why? You were drawn to us. Our
And
humor.
you did go on a drive with, in fact, with the Ferrari.
I went on a drive with the R Grouper and brought the M1.
That's right. But you also went on a drive with me in the Ferrari and Karsten and.
Oh yeah, that's right.
And so I'm driving down the highway with the Ferrari and it dies, and I pull over to the side and I'm walking down the center of the highway to see what exit I'm at so I can tell AAA I'm at this exit. Karsten, who's a German friend of ours, pulls over because he sees some guy wandering down the middle of the highway and realizes he knows that guy. Oh, and he push starts me, which gets the car started again. So then we go out for breakfast with Phil and a couple other people. And every time I have to start the car, they have to push
I
start
remember
me.
that.
Yeah,
I remember that.
Yeah. But we kept going. I mean, there's no big deal. I'm used to that kind of issue.
On the R Grouper, we switched cars. I had the M1 and you drove that and you didn't like it, did you?
Well, I just thought
It was
it
too
felt
much
like
car
a
for you.
just a good car. I mean, I like cars. I don't mind if cars have issues, or I should say drawbacks, because those
Foibles.
drawbacks are part of the character of the car.
Sure.
I want to drive a car that has a character and has a feeling and has an emotional connection to the car.
Sure.
A car that's just a good car. And I feel when cars got to be too modern, they lose all those things that take you onto a time travel trip, really, that make you take you away from where your modern life is.
Right.
And I really like older cars for that reason.
I don't know, man. I own, I guess, all 80s and 90s stuff, and I find that they are just as foibly, if that's a word, as the old stuff, but just in different ways. You know what I mean?
just feel they drive better.
Yeah, no, they do. They certainly drive better for sure. But they have, like, all of those cars that I own have their own weird things you have to kind of learn to live with. It's not dissimilar to having a relationship with a person. You get to know their foibles and you kind of work around them or live with them in some way.
Yeah.
And I mean, I would say, I feel like maybe the 90s was the last era of any car having having imperfections in that way. Don't you think? I mean, I feel like
I think everything's generational, right? Won't older generations look at any old car as an old car?
Right.
Do you know what I mean? Any old car from the youth will still seem old.
Yeah.
I mean, even if you've had a modern car for 10 years and you still have that same modern car and you go rent a car, the rent-a-car will have all these upgrades, technological things that you're kind of blown away by. You
Right.
know? That happens. I think that's going to be the case.
I was in a Tesla the other day. Do you ever drive a Tesla?
I've been in them. I've never driven one.
I loved it. It was amazing, but it was like that. I was like, holy shit, this is 24th. This is 24th century business in here. And I really enjoyed that. People always complain about electric cars, they make the noise and all the rest of it. But for me, I don't think it's a question of comparison. It's a question of a different experience. Because the electricity, the torque, I mean, everyone always goes about the instant torque, but it's so much fun.
Yeah.
I
rented an EV1 because budget rent-a-car in LA used to rent EV1s. And I was
was that the GM car?
Yeah, the GM car. And I was going to a wedding on Mulholland Drive.
Yeah.
And I drive up to the top of Mulholland Drive and I'm out of batteries. And I'm like, what the hell? How could you rent this car? I can't believe you rented it. I went from the airport to the top of Mulholland Drive. I have no battery. And the guy had said to me casually, if you ever come up to a stop sign or something like that, there's a little button on the side of the stick shift. Push that in. So the wedding was at the bottom on the downside of the hill. So I pushed the button in and I cruised down. By the time I got to the wedding, I had full power left. And then it had...
Did it run a motor to charge the battery?
Yeah, they charge the battery.
That's what the little red button does.
Yeah,
is it?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then it had a plug, a regular household plug.
Right.
I drove it into somebody's front yard and plugged it into their, into the receptacle that was there while I went to the wedding.
What was that like to drive?
It was fantastic. It was wonderful. Because for one, you turn the car on and the dashboard went around in like a semicircle around you.
Oh, that's
very
cool.
Starship.
You know what I love is that the what's that VW called?
The XL1?
Yeah.
So
that's so. You know what I'm talking about? That's like super futuristic. It's not dissimilar in a weird way, shape-wise, to the EV1. It has spats on the rear wheels. It does like a 200 miles to the gallon or something crazy.
Well, so our other podcast, great time
there
to
are
plug that.
There are no other podcasts.
The other Hagerty podcast network
this
show,
one.
the Carmudgeon Show. Jason Camisa actually saw one of those driving around like the San Francisco area late at night, flagged down the owner just to kind of like check it out.
Yale style, came running up to when he was in the
No,
lights.
totally. And then basically connected to them the next day and like drove it for like a whole day around.
Wow.
Yeah, he said it was totally amazing.
Yeah.
In what way?
Huh?
In what way was it amazing?
Just because like it's such he called it like the Veyron of miles per gallon.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Right? Because it was no expense spare designed to just
Right.
like achieve the maximum potential of like miles per gallon.
So that's a car you can buy?
Yeah, in Europe you can.
It was like limited production sort of thing.
And they're like 130 grand now. Those things.
But you're the first person I've encountered in this industry who actually has driven an EV1.
That's
Yeah.
because Yale is 122 years
There
old.
you go, that's right.
Remember when you drove the original Ford Model T? How that was, man.
I mean, here's the thing: was it quick? Did it feel like a Saturn?
Sure. It was quite quick, because it's an electric car, right? So it has that
Off
the line acceleration.
I was one of the.
It had a funny heaviness to it. So like there was this dip on the way back to the airport, and I remember in LA, and you'd hit this dip with the EV1 and kind of, oh God, it kind of would come up and you'd pop up in the air a little bit and come right back down, So it was weighted weirdly, and the tires were kind of thin, but it was a really fun car to drive. I mean, really.
I always wanted
so
to
unique.
drive for a while. I considered buying the Honda Insight.
Mm-hmm.
I just loved because they all have similar. I guess that's that they share a similar design ethos because that's the most fuel efficient design. But I just love how and those are supposed to be really fun to drive. Did you ever drive one of those?
No. I think the interesting thing about Tesla is the fact that it's designed by someone like us who likes cars. And, the people who work for car companies like cars. I mean, that's why they're working for car companies. But by the time they get a car designed, they've made so many kind of compromises, whereas Tesla or Apple or any company driven by one person's vision, gets to kind of take chances where someone else might say, oh, that might be too much.
Well, for sure. But I mean, look, that applies to everything. I mean, even when it's a flat,
but it's so rare.
A dictatorship is a much better idea for designing stuff than the committee. Always, if the dictator has decent taste. Always.
I mean, it's just so rare that you have a company of that size that has one person really making design decisions.
Right. Oh, okay, that's it. I should tell everyone actually.
Well, no, that's actually.
Wait, I want to just alert the audience that Yale is the king of. In England, it's called the Irish goodbye, but in Ireland, it's called the English goodbye. So when I'm talking on the phone to Yale, and he feels like we've reached the end of the conversation, we're like, okay, thanks, bye, and you'll just hang up and you'll be like, so this may happen if you want to just get up and leave. And then
I don't like to overstay my welcome.
Oh no, you're still welcome here.
Okay.
Well, so obviously the dictatorship in terms of running a business, right? That's an interesting thing. It does not happen very often. But is that something that you see a lot of in the record business?
Record business is a lot different. Record business was always a mom and pop business until CDs came along. And when CDs came along, because you could never determine, when an artist would deliver a record, and when you couldn't say this is what our income's going to be. But when CDs came along, right, it changed everything, because all of a sudden, you care about that?
Oh, well, we're here in New York. So
okay. So what it changed everything. So that all of a sudden you could plan for reissuing all your catalog, and you could plan for what your quarterly results were going to be. And it totally changed who owned record labels and their attitude towards record labels. And that was a huge change in the music industry and the kind of music that was recorded. Up until that point, in my youth, you'd pull out a sleeve on an LP jacket, and there would be all these different styles of music, because it didn't really matter. There was an audience that wanted polka. There was an audience that wanted Latin music or whatever. So record labels did a lot of different kinds of music. But when the youth revolution happened in the 60s and bands started making a lot of money, that started falling away. And then CDs came in, and that really totally killed every other kind of music. And the next thing that happened was that there was a thing called SoundScan. You care about that either? So there was
Wait, hold on, what?
We should just tell everyone that we're in a new space that is slightly less soundproof.
We're working on it. We're working on it.
Than the old space.
We are diligently working on it.
Anyway, so it used to be when we went through, as a label, we went through Warner Brothers at first, and they had a department that would just send out gifts to people who worked in record stores to report their records as having sold well. So when you saw a Billboard chart, that was all just kind of fabricated. And then something called SoundScan came along, where they actually had stores reporting actual sales based on barcodes. And people started to realize, whoa, country music really sells a lot. Hip hop really sells a lot.
Well, you really had had a lot of very specific information suddenly, whereas you didn't before, right?
Well,
so then they could start. The
white guys who worked at the record labels who were interested in rock made sure that rock bands were the ones that got reported, because that's what that was important to them.
Right.
And that just changed when, like I said, when SoundScan came along. But so record labels were always, well, I won't say always, but often driven by one person's or a small group of people's taste.
Right.
Really quite a bit different than other industries. My wife used to say, it's like one of the few places where arts and commerce actually are totally mixed.
Right, because one needs the other.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's fascinating. I mean, the record industry in general is fascinating, especially the modern version. So thank you for indulging me.
I mean, I could talk about music for ages, about my love of
Actually,
music.
Phil, what music are you into, Phil?
Oh, I mean, look, a lot of...
No, at least you got Spotify, right?
Not really.
The show is available on Spotify.
No, I actually know.
Spotify now.
That's what I was going to say. I got Spotify when I realized I could listen to myself talk, which I do. It's just, sometimes I'll just spend an afternoon listening to these podcasts, regaling myself. Music used to be hugely important to me, and I was really, really interested in a really, really broad range of, I thought, but for the time, pretty weird stuff like country music from the 30s, I don't know, Gregorian chants, sea shanties. I really loved that. What was that? Alan Lomax, those recordings he did when he went through all sorts of punk music, massive reggae, punk. Anyway, but as I got older, I music was less and less important to me, or it didn't seem to be around me much.
I always loved music as a kid, and I was afraid to work with music because I thought I would ruin it for myself. And at first, I went to college and I thought I was going to work in radio, but then I thought, okay, that's just really a dead end for me, and it's not going to be really what I'm interested in.
You've actually got a really good voice for radio, man.
You do.
I find myself curiously aroused,
I'm not aroused, but I do agree with a great voice.
I had no idea. I've never listened to your voice through headphones.
Well,
but maybe we can make this a more regular occurrence.
You want to do this podcast? I go, that's not going to work for a friend. What the hell? And I realized, I also felt it was not going to work because you have to understand when we're together, we never talk about me at all. This is the most Phil has ever heard about me.
You know what? This is really painful.
Right. He's learned your name today.
Yeah. And the funny thing is, so once he started doing the podcast, he would try to ask me a question like, so what are you working on now? And I realized I could quickly change the subject to him. And that whole what are you working on now thing would just go right by the wayside because there really wasn't an interest in that, which was fine because I was actually uncomfortable talking to you about anything I was doing.
Why, man? Because of my towering intellect.
Because one, you're not interested.
No, that's not true.
You're not interested in music, you know. And I so you know. It's
No,
very,
but here's the thing. Hang on, let me interrupt. It's not that I'm
And
not.
that's fine. That's not a problem
Hang on.
for me.
Let me interrupt, man. It's not that I'm not interested. It's that it's not. It doesn't play a big part in my life. But I am interested in the stories you tell about your music because they're always such incredibly fucking crazy, fascinating, weird stories about this guy and this family members, and then this cousin popped up and he doesn't want to be on it. So I love the stories, but it's not that I'm not interested in music. Right. Actually, I have to be because Lulu's always playing me. My kid is always like, what about this song, Dad? What about that song? And it's often stuff I really have. That stuff I don't have much interest in because it's often pop music.
Yeah, that's what I like as Phil said, I kind of work with somewhat more obscure stuff. So it's always hard for me to talk to other people about music who aren't interested in music because I know they're just not going to be interested.
Yeah, but the stories are great, man.
Yeah.
Because when you talk, you're not telling stories to me about music. You're telling stories to me about people.
Yeah,
that's what those stories are. You can't convey what the music's like, but they're just fascinating. And also, what's interesting to me about what you do with your music in particular is the insane amount of patience you have. Like when you describe to me why the deals you're trying to put together, the records you're trying to make, it's kind of like you're sort of made of water. Like you're always in motion and you always find some way, like a little trickle through this little gap. Like everyone's saying no, but then you find a little way to like some guy, you buy him a sandwich, you go out for a beer, you want to have some chicken wings, whatever it is. And suddenly, you manage to sort of charm this guy into saying, okay, fine, I'll make this record. No is really kind of a suggestion for you. It's never a definitive.
Yeah, I don't think no is ever the real answer.
That's right, which is amazing. Yeah. I also actually feel like you need to have that attitude if you own old cars.
Right.
Because it's interesting, like when I talk about watches to people, like I own some watches from the 70s, these Patek quartz watches, and people are like, oh, I don't know, there's what happens when they don't work, or how do you fix those things? And anyone who's really loves old cars, who's had old cars for years, there's always a way to fix something. There's never something that's unfixable, except perhaps in the case of your BMW, which is permanently unfixable. But that's the one exception in the entire vintage car ownership experience.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that I guess, what was I going to say there? The whole, I used to travel a lot. I used to go all over the world, and then I had a kid and I stopped traveling, and then I started getting I was in the cars as a kid. But I picked it back up again because I bought a Mercedes diesel station wagon, a 10-year-old Mercedes diesel station wagon, right at the dawn of the internet. And I realized cars are as much of a culture as any other culture that you're going to see. And the idea of cars as culture became interesting to me. And I was looking at this headline in maybe it was the newspaper or something, and it said something about meaning, bringing meaning to life and joy. And I really liked those two things together. That's kind of really important to me, that there's a meaning to things, that things have another level to them. Of course, that article was about TikTok. So,
it was about sponge cakes.
No, it was about TikTok.
Well, yeah, but I mean, as abusive as our relationship is, you always have these really lovely, keen insights, particularly into like being a parent and stuff. That it's kind of embarrassing to have to say this in public, but I value your insight. Yeah, I will never say this again, and we'll probably lose the files.
If you're watching on YouTube,
you'll edit this stuff out.
This will never make it. This will never be aired.
Well, so what's a recent piece of advice that you got that you?
Okay, so I said to Yael, I go pick up Lou in the car from school, and she just gets on her phone. I feel like a bloody chauffeur, and so you said, well, "Do you want to?"
Well, I mean, I just said, you can't go to her. You're making me feel like a chauffeur. Just put the phone down.
Because I tend to go like full Victorian father, like, how dare you, child, and all this kind of bullshit, which is surprising for me.
I mean, you have to make the kid care about you in the sense that what am I supposed to do while you're here on your phone? Like at least to talk to me a little bit. I mean, I don't
Well,
know.
your suggestion was a negotiation. So when Lulu gets in the car, I say, okay, you can tell me, you have to tell me 2 stories about something that happened.
And then get on your phone.
And then you can go look at TikTok for the next 20 minutes.
So you brokered, you basically put like a contract in front of her, like, hey, check out the deal I'm offering you. Come sign with it. Okay, I like that. See?
I mean,
She came with a lawyer. We sat down.
I think everything's a negotiation.
It is.
Yeah.
But also you think everything's in negotiation always ends up in a good way, which is
because you have to take the other person's needs into consideration.
Well, that's bullshit.
And I think that's really important with a kid, that the kid's going to, the other thing I say, you have to say the kid has to realize that when they become a teenager, that their point of their teenagehood is to separate themselves from you.
Right.
That's the point. You can't be insulted by that. And the kid has to realize that's what they're doing. You're not any more of a jerk than you were like 3 years ago. You're the same jerk you were 3 years ago, but he's got to make a point to kind of become his own person, or their own person. And that's important.
Well, one of the things you told me a long time ago is how you went with Cole, your son, you would always kind of remind him, like, you're being a teenager, but this is what you're supposed to be doing, is like, being mad at me and all this stuff. And so you would sort of point it out to him.
Yeah,
right?
well, I mean, and also say, look, I was like that to my parents, and your kids are going to be like this to you. So this is how you're supposed to be when you tell me I'm a complete idiot or whatever. That's what you're supposed to do.
Right.
That's how it works.
Because that's what I've been saying to Lulu.
Yeah, I mean, because for me, the important thing with my kid was that he looked around at the situation he was in and realized why he was in that situation, what was going on, what was the other person who was annoying him, why were they annoying him, what were they thinking about, what was what was happening with them that made them be annoying to him. Because everything, all the things going on, there's all these different levels to them, and they should always be thinking about them so he's not feeling oppressed by the situation he's in. That's my thing.
God, you actually do have really good advice.
Yeah, it's like,
because like talking about teens are supposed to be separating right there. Like that, no one ever puts it in that context.
Yeah,
you should call him more often.
Oh God.
So we have a son named Cole.
Yeah.
How old is he?
He's 30 now.
Oh, so he can drive.
Yeah. He can drive, yeah.
Does he like cars?
Mm-hmm. And he can drive a stick, which he's very proud about.
Well, because I'm sure he's like the only person amongst his friends.
Yeah. Actually, he has friends who are car people.
Really?
Yeah, that's what I know.
Do you think all your friends are car people? Almost all.
I mean, a lot of them are. Yeah, the beauty of a hobby like cars is you meet a bunch of people who have no other shared interests with you. And that's always so interesting, that you meet people who you would have had nothing to do with otherwise.
Also, you meet people who you connect them through cars, which is an incredibly sort of intimate connection in some ways.
My wife feels the opposite of intimate connection because everybody's in their own car.
Oh, I see. Interesting. But then you meet people who I meet people who are politically maybe so far on the other end of the spectrum from me, and I would never meet them other than the fact that we like cars.
So speaking of our grupa, I was having dinner with some people. Hang
on? Why don't you explain what our grupa is?
I don't want to.
Because people have to know.
Okay, so our group was originally a few people in California who took the California hot rod ethos to Porsches, to vintage Porsches, to long hood Porsches. And that was pretty revolutionary at the time.
And this was in what?
It was
the 80s or 90s?
22 years ago.
Okay.
And so they created a cultural world around them and decided to kind of call it something. And in the Porsche world in the time of their cars, there was the famous Porsche R, which is a race car, and there was Porsche made a book so that you could soup your car up like the race cars that Porsche made and raced. So it had all the options.
When did they make this book? In the 60s or 70s?
In the 60s.
That's right.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so the idea was that you were.
Can you imagine Porsche doing that now? It would just be options like paint a sample, exactly. What kind of leather you would have.
Yeah. And it was limited to 300 members because the head of it could remember the names of 300 people.
Not 301.
I've got to say, I can't remember 300. Wait, wasn't it a designer?
Freeman Thomas.
Freeman Thomas started it.
Yeah, it was one of the two people who started it. Yeah.
Freeman, for those of you who don't know, Freeman Thomas is the guy who designed the originally Audi TT, which I'm a massive fan.
Mm-hmm. But have you ever driven one?
No, but
pretty disappointing.
Is it?
I think
it drives like a Mark IV Golf or Jetta.
Yeah, it's
slow? Yeah,
It's
but the
just
design.
it's not that tactile. It's not,
Okay, but I mean, just from a design standpoint, people seem to forget that car was revolutionary at the time. In the late 90s, very late 90s, there was nothing like that car.
well, he was making a Porsche, an Audi Porsche.
Yeah, I guess so.
You know?
Anyway, so our grouper,
So I'm having dinner with some our group friends in Philadelphia, and my brother who lives in Philly and is a very kind of 180 degree different from me as a person. One of the guys,
humorous.
my brother was an electrician, and he worked in a convention center in Philly, and there's a lot of levels to this story, but anyway. So I said, well, you know, one of the guys I'm meeting for dinner, his brother worked. He was like the enforcer for the carpenters union in the convention center. And my brother goes, "Oh, it wasn't the gorilla, was it?" I go, "I don't think so. That doesn't sound like that would be this guy."
Well, did he introduce himself as I'm the gorilla?
I have no idea. Anyway, my brother is like one of these people. I said, "So yeah," I said, "We're having dinner at this restaurant if you want to come." He goes, No, not come. But my brother shows up. And he goes, but he told me that before, is that if it's the gorilla, you know, he punched me, he knocked me out. I go, really? Yeah. So he shows up and he goes, "So which one of you guys is the brother of the gorilla?" And nobody on one end of the table heard him. And one of the guys said, "Hey, Mike, he's asking about your brother."
Oh no.
And then they were just kind of blown away that, you know, one of the guy's brother punched my brother out. You know?
I thought you were going to say your brother went over there and punched the brother out.
Yeah.
Just for...
No, he said, you know, Yael, you should punch him now.
That's what I thought it was going to go.
Yeah, no, but at any rate, I don't know where that story was going or what the point of that was, but it was about, I guess, different worlds, you know, of people you would meet.
So our group is still a thing.
It's still a thing, yeah. Mm-hmm.
How many members?
300.
Still 300.
Yeah.
So there's no way in until someone's out.
Right. But there's some, I mean, the idea
Do people
is.
ever get kicked out?
Yeah.
But what are they? What kind of infractions get you kicked out?
You know, okay.
You lose your post cap.
Here's one of the ways I was going with this whole thing. I was in the PCA for 1 year. I was in the Ferrari Club for 1 year. What are those organizations like? Okay, that's not who I am. I'm not interested in being in a group, those groups, or any group really. I wasn't that interested in being in our group, but I all of a sudden had a car that was kind of someone in our group had created, and so I ended up in our group. And I really liked the fact that it had no rules per se, and there was no organization per se. There was nothing about it per se that was anything other than there would be a place that say, "We're going to get together here, come here." And you would go there to wherever that was, rent your hotel room, and you'd go off on a drive if you wanted, or do whatever you want, hang out in the parking lot, have drinks, or whatever it was you wanted
Silver
to do.
manatee.
There was no organizational activities.
So what gets you kicked out then?
Try and bring organization, obviously.
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, there's an arc to all of these things. Like in the Ferrari Club, it would always be the person who no longer had a Ferrari who was the most kind of important person in the club. You know, where the people who had the highest end, the most expensive cars, they never had time really to be the organizational people or the people giving of their time to make sure everybody else had an interesting time and stuff like that. So you could just watch arcs of organizations and how organizations want to become organizations. So our group, starts out very, very amorphous, and as time goes on, it gets less and less amorphous because
It gets more calcified, right?
well, that's just the general nature of things,
Right, sure.
And there's becomes more structure, and because people who are then joined later then have a belief system in what it is that they're joining. When the people in the beginning, they were just part of a group of people who were getting together. They weren't joining anything in particular, So, there's an interesting arc to all organizations that goes.
So, where's the arc right now for our group? Or can't you say?
I mean, it's reinventing. I feel it's Chris. There's a guy named Chris who was really the head of our group, and he died last year. And he was in a way the soul of our group. He was very disorganized. There would always be someone else who would be an organizational person, but he was the person who knew everybody's name in it. He knew everybody in it. He was just a wonderful, very, very human person. And so when someone like that goes, then it's very hard for an organization to hold on to that humanity. And it's always trying to kind of swim around, to trying to figure out, like, what is it now without Chris there?
And what is it now?
I was saying to the guys in Philly, it's like, our group is us. It's whoever we want it to be. It's us right now in this room. That's what our group is, an idea. It's not a number or a T-shirt or a bumper sticker. It's just an idea. And the idea is something we all, all of us in it believe in. And so we don't need anything more than that.
You're very romantic, aren't you?
I am in that way.
In a lot of ways, I think.
Yeah.
It's a lovely thing. God, this is terrible, man. All these compliments, man.
I was going to say, that's a nice compliment.
Yeah, I take it back. Please, that never happened.
Please take that
See,
back.
now it's awkward.
Take that back.
Now it's awkward. You could do the English goodbye.
I could. I'm
Just
done.
Are
we done? Have we hit the hour?
Yeah.
Whatever you guys, we have there's no constraints.
There's
It's
no
like our
rules,
group.
Sam. There's no rules.
Right.
That's it. Okay, that's it. Well, okay. Let me just, before you take off everything, before you take off all your clothes, I just want to say thanks for coming in. It's been a real delight.
Yeah. Thanks, Phil. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
And Matt.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
All right.
It was better than I thought it would be.
You see, better than you thought it'd be is like high praise.
Yeah.
That's like a multi-orgasmic
I just thought we'd sit there
compliment
going
from
like
you.
humming.
I told you it wasn't going to be a disaster, man.
And then you would like every time I started to say something, oh yeah, always says that.
No, man. Look, I knew that if you were given the opportunity to blabber, you would run free like a
And
horse.
this will be the last time I'll be able to say anything to Phil for the next 10 years.
That's right. You should get it all in now, man.
I've covered everything.
Yeah.
Thank
All
you,
right, well,
guys.
look, thanks so much for coming, man. It was a delight.